So this week we're doing something a little different. I gave you two kinds of texts again. And again, one of them is a traditional humanities text, and one of them is a kind of digital humanities technology. And but they're a little different from the previous week. In the previous week, they were both kind of representations of inequality. All right. And and this time the texts work differently in the sense that, I mean, I suppose the Flannery O'Connor story I ask you to read could be understood as a representation of inequality, but it's actually, I think, the best understood as also an effort to expose prejudice, which is different, right, from just representing it. And in the video lecture where I talk about the story, I describe how that works. But what I want to do first is talk about the implicit bias association test, which is on the, which is from Harvard University. So if you click on this, the second text, this link, it will take you over to Project Implicit. And I'll just walk you through how to do this in case you're like, what do I do here? You don't have to log in, you don't have to register. You can just click go here, which is what I'd recommend. I don't know that I'd mess around with this. So what we want is, we want to do this part. We want to go to go, and then open it up, and you can read over this if you want to. And then just say, yes, I got it. I wish to proceed. And then you can choose any of these tests. And what it's going to do is it's going to use your responses to images and to detect whether you have a bias toward whatever it's measuring. So the first one measures ideas about sexuality, Asian American, ideas about Asian Americans, and versus whites, et cetera. There are all these different kinds of biases that it can measure. And of course, since we live in a democracy, we live in a society where the kind of prevailing idea is that having these kinds of biases is not great, right? It's not considered a virtue to have biases. And what that means is that it's natural for people to try to conceal them if they do have them. Not everyone, and perhaps less than they used to, but often people will try to conceal them. And so what's interesting, and I suppose, that what we could also say that people may even try to conceal them from themselves. And so you may have had this experience where you talk to someone who sort of very obviously seems to have certain prejudices, but they will tell you that they don't. But you listening to them, you think, that's funny. My impression is that you do. You probably don't say that, but you may think it. And so there's these are just obvious realities about bias, right? Is that on the one hand, we live in a society where it's generally looked down upon to have biases. And so most people don't want to have them. And I think that can be we could extend that to the statement that it's disagreeable for people to discover that they do have them. And so what that means is that it can happen that people have biases that they themselves would not approve of and cannot see. In the same way that, that I might have all kinds of sort of other traits that I don't think are good, but that I'm not able to be honest with myself about having them, right? And so that's where these tests come in. They're very interesting, because what they do is they using technology, they create a situation where a bias that I might not admit or even be aware of can be detected. And so that's the service that it offers people. And, as you might expect, not everyone's grateful to have this pointed out, right? So I just ask you to take one of these things and kind of, you don't have to write about it, but if you're interested in it, you can write about it. And you may or may not learn anything from the experience. I mean, um, I think you can learn all sorts of things. I mean, I just took one just in order to get to the screen at the end that will be displayed when you take yours so that I could talk about it. And so, I took the one on let's see, I took weapons just because I thought it was kind of interesting. And in this IAT, you'll be asked to categorize white and black faces as well as images of weapons and harmless objects. And so this one is trying to figure out if the person tested has bias by seeing if they will associate, weapons or dangerous objects with any particular race. And doing so might be understood to be a bias. And, in the United States, you can imagine how this would work. And so I just took this one. I was curious about this, and like I said, I wanted to get to the results screen, this part, so I can talk about it. So interestingly, my result was your responses suggested a slight automatic association for harmless objects with Black Americans and weapons with white Americans. And so this shows that I have, I guess, a slight bias associating white people with weapons. Uh, if I understand this correctly, the the racial bias that it's looking for is actually the opposite of this one, the opposite of what my result. And so if we look at, this is the thing I wanted to show you, the interesting part. So I mean, obviously the result it gives you is interesting to you, and so this one is, I thought, I mean, I think when it's slight, it might just be within the sort of, you know, you'll see when you take it. Like if you might hesitate, or you're trying to go fast, you make a mistake or something. So this isn't a super strong result, but anyways, let's look at the results overall. So it scores everybody who takes these tests. Lots of people take these tests. So it says, I mean, this is the part that I find quite interesting. So about a quarter of all the people who take the test have a strong automatic association of Black Americans with weapons and white Americans with harmless objects. So this, I would submit to you, this is what bias looks like. This is a racial bias that is a prejudice against Black people, viewing them as associating them with violence and danger and, crime and so on. It's the typical, you know, uh, prejudice that you'd expect in the United States. And so if we add up all the people who took the test, their results, so a quarter of people have a strong automatic association like this. A third of people have a sort of medium one, and a fifth of people have a slight one. And maybe slight isn't important. I don't know. I mean, when you add all that up, you're at about 50%. You're at like 73% of people who take the test to some degree associate Black Americans with weapons and white Americans with harmless objects. So that seems to be, when you put it that way, it's detecting a very strong signal. Relatively, only 6% of respondents got the score that I did, which is sort of like the reverse, obviously of this thing. I don't really know what that says about me. Maybe I have a reverse bias, and I don't know. So you're trying to get to this screen, right? You're trying to take the test, fill out the stuff, give it the information. It's anonymized. It's not going to remember your name. You never give your name. And then you can get to the screen and you can sort of see how these kind of operations that you're doing with your fingers and just looking at pictures is measuring a bias that you may have without knowing it. And that's what it thinks. And, I took this test twice, and the first time I took it, it said you have no discernible bias. And I tried to go a little faster and I got this one. So I'm not sure if it's because I was just trying to race through it to get to the screen, or if I really have a bit of a prejudice against white people. It's possible. So take it, see what you think. And then what I want to do is I want to compare this kind of technology, this kind of text. It is a certain kind of text and a certain kind of interactive text, which is trying to sort of uh, unearth or expose or discover a bias, with this brilliant Flannery O'Connor story that I'll talk about in the other lecture, which tries to do the same thing in quite a different way. And I want to do the kind of the same thing we've been doing, but in this different context where the humanities texts, the two that we're looking at, are understood to be probes of the reader or of the test taker, which seek to discover in the test taker or the reader a bias that may not even be particularly conscious. Um, and so I'm interested to, you know, think about that, and to hear what you think about how relatively powerful or effective these two different sorts of texts that are trying to do the same thing turn out to be.